today. I want to start by thanking Dino Mulić and Sangmi for hosting Piano Celebration Week and for having me on board. I think it's a brilliant way of exploring the piano and piano playing from a lot of different angles, which I think is so important and which I hope I can contribute a little bit to today. I want to thank you for listening and watching, and I want to encourage you. I'll say this again at the end, but I want to encourage you to reach out to me with any questions, comments, if you just want to talk about what I've talked about today. I love having those conversations, and I'll put my contact info at the end of this. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about my upbringing with the piano and piano competitions. I might try to sprinkle a couple of tidbits of advice for younger folks, paths I took along the way that were maybe good or less good. And then I'm going to move into what is really the heart of what I'm talking about today, which is preparing for piano competitions. And my hope is that I'm presenting you with a framework for that is constructive, thinking, bigger picture about our longer term development through piano competitions and just making great music and enjoying it. So I grew up in Connecticut with a mom who taught piano to younger kids and was usually the one hounding me to practice, and a dad who was really committed to broadening my horizons, and I think I was really lucky to have that balance. I was also really lucky to have a lot of opportunities to perform as a young kid in Connecticut, and it's something that I really encourage everyone to do, is just to take every opportunity you can to get on stage. I think as pianists, it's easy to spend a lot of time in the practice room and sometimes lose touch of communicating those ideas to an audience. And so, of course, conditions being what they are now, that may be some time, but once things are back and rolling, really encourage you guys to take every chance you can get to get up and share some music with folks. Throughout high school, I had the chance to play a lot locally, to really get to know the community through music, and to participate in some regional and national competitions. Did decently well. And when it came time to apply to college, I was interested in doing the combination of academic work and continuing my music, and was lucky enough to become a member of the Harvard NEC dual degree program. Before I headed to Boston, I took a gap year, and it's another little piece of advice I would offer. I was obviously really lucky to have the support and the resources available to take that time off, but I will say it was one of the most constructive periods of my development. And reading books, learned German, went to Germany, spent a lot of time around the piano, but also a lot of time away from the piano. And it's in the busy lives that we lead, it's easy to lose track of that space. So I really encourage you, if you have ever the chance to just take some time off. It's something that can be really helpful for our development. With that said, arriving at the conservatory and at college, I was still pretty insecure. I know that's something that a lot of folks deal with, because we don't really know how we fit into the bigger pond. And I was really lucky to study with Miss Wak-Young Byun and Russell Sherman. Both of them just incredible, imaginative minds, and so inspiring in that way, but also kind of gave me this belief that I was bringing something to the table. So that was really important for my development. Miss Byun is not only an incredible creative mind, but also an excellent coach, and she encouraged me to start applying to some mid-level international competitions, kind of wade into that scene, and really gave me a lot of practical advice, which I'll share with you later, that helped me on my way. With that said, The first couple did not go particularly well. Oftentimes didn't hear anything back at all, and it was definitely frustrating at times. But stuck with it, and in 2015 I went to the Dublin International Piano Competition, had a fantastic time with incredible people, made great friends in a beautiful place, and ended up coming in third in that one. The year following that, I came in third in the Queen Elizabeth competition in Brussels, which was also just an incredible journey that's still kind of hard to believe looking back on it. And then in the meantime was a finalist in the American Pianist Association awards, which gave me the opportunity to travel a lot around the States and to play a lot of great repertoire. So I was really lucky with the opportunities that I had. Through my participation in these competitions, I was given the chance to travel much of Europe and the States to meet heads of state and ambassadors, and really most importantly to make lifelong friends and see some beautiful places. So to me, the challenge of the piano competition is the long time horizon over which it takes place. Between the application process, recordings, and then moving on to the live rounds, it can take in excess of a year, and as I'm sure many of you know, it's a very taxing process. And I think it presents a problem and an opportunity. The problem, in my view, is that it's kind of unnatural if we are working on the same set of repertoire, especially for that amount of time with that intensity. I think it can become stale. Our ears can sort of grow a little bit numb to that music, and even in my experience, come to resent it a little bit. And so that's something that I want to try to address with my ideas today. On the other hand, the opportunity is that it gives us a goal. It gives us a timeline. It gives us a very clear pathway to work on things. And I think that can be a really nice way to kind of get ourselves energized. And in my experience, that was the case. So I guess the goal today is to harness that energy and then address kind of the problematic nature of working on a particular set of repertoire for that amount of time, and in a way that is going to make us better pianists, better musicians, and better artists.
I'll start with a couple of disclaimers. First, the framework that I present today is just a set of ideas. It's by no means prescriptive. All of you out there looking to participate in piano competitions will have unique relationships to the process, and I encourage you to explore that. By virtue of participating in this festival, which presents such a well-rounded set of ideas around playing the piano and experiencing music, you're already taking a big step in that creative and exciting direction. Second, my ideas benefit from 20/20 hindsight. I'll emphasize that in the moment, I encountered real frustrations in the competition process and often struggled to see the bigger picture. My hope is that in presenting to you today, I can alleviate some of those frustrations for all of you. So where do we start? I want to talk broad strokes first, and I want to present an idea that I'll call the creative spectrum. Now, what on earth do I mean by that? I like to think of my interactions with the piano, with music, and with art on a scale of abstractness. On one hand, we've got the more abstract, maybe less direct activities. For me, these are taking a walk in the woods, doing some mental practice, meditating, engaging with other art forms, going to a museum, reading a great novel. On the other side, we've got the more practical, working on specific passage work, more repetitive exercises, technical warm-ups, and I'm going to talk about more of these activities in a little bit more depth later. I really encourage you to think about the more abstract and more practical ways that you engage with the piano. But for now, what I want to focus on is how this spectrum of activities can present us with kind of a fresh approach to practice over that long time horizon. I find that I've got a finite amount of mental energy and a finite amount of physical energy to expend on a day of practice. The mental energy wanes first, and I find myself doing my best creative work early on. As the day moves on, I start to move into the more hands-on realm, with passage work and technical exercises and the like. Again, this may be different for anyone, but the creative spectrum allows me to organize my practice in a way to distribute that finite energy over the day. Let me lay out an example of what this might look like in real life. I'll start a day with a walk outside and some mental practice. The beauty of mental practice for me is that it primes my mind and my ear for physical practice. It gives me that burning desire to put my hands on the piano and work something out. Coming in from that walk, I've built that desire, and my creative energies are ready to go. Getting to the piano, I want to take advantage of this invigoration. That brings me to a pretty abstract type of practice that I absolutely love, which is to delve into a solitary passage, maybe a particularly sonorous moment or an extreme texture, and spend an hour or two experimenting with it. This practice probably lends itself best to later music, maybe 20th century and beyond, and as a Rachmaninoff lover, it really knows no bounds. But that is by no means exclusive. From there, I'll start moving into the more practical matters. I'm a big believer in the importance of consistent technical exercises, especially scales. I'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment, but collections I recommend are Dochnani, Brahms, and some Hanon. Once my fingers are warm, I might work on a particularly technical passage, or if I've still got those creative juices flowing, a passage that requires a more subtle but highly technical execution. I'd think of the waves of Ravel's water music. Lots of really close listening, but the fingers are engaged. By the end of the day, I'm working on pretty repetitious practice of passage work. The one thing I will say is that I think systematic repetition is really important. It's easy to kind of start slugging through passages and to stop listening, and I think it's important to always have a goal with our repetition. As for knowing when to stop at the end of the day, for me the answer is pretty simple. It's when I've stopped listening. So the hope is that we've kind of harnessed this spectrum of energy from the more creative at the beginning to the more physical at the end. And in doing so, we've avoided burning ourselves out. And the nice thing about this is that I find myself, it's sort of cyclical, right? So by the next day, I'm sort of ready to begin this process again. I hope this example illuminates the concept of the creative spectrum. And in case it doesn't, let's go back to the spectrum and fill it in a little bit. Again, I encourage you to search for the things that engage you on different levels of abstractness. So let's fill in the spectrum a little bit. I mentioned taking a walk, doing mental practice, perhaps those go hand in hand. Meditation, you'll hear about more. Engaging with creative arts, I have taken a lot of inspiration from film, capturing images in our mind that really inspire us to create color and texture can be such a great thing. Visual art, being there in 3 dimensions with great works of art, it's hard to replace that experience. And then literature, not only as a kind of historical context for the inspiration that a lot of composers took from literature, but also, again, just having these images in our head that we can aspire to. I mentioned travel. I know that has not been happening, but hopefully it will return soon. I encourage, always trying to see new places, and enjoying that as sort of a fresh inspiration. I have enjoyed historical reading. Biographies are a big part of what informs my approach. I do hope that my interpretations are informed by at least a cursory understanding of where the composer was coming from historically and sort of the atmosphere in which they were operating. And finally, listening to non-keyboard music. So, symphonic repertoire is huge because, again, we expand our palette of sounds and images to work with once we are at the piano. Moving to somewhere in the middle, there's a couple things. Gathering inspiration from famous recordings, maybe some less famous recordings, just kind of investigating that has been a big part of my development. I've written down building voice by voice, and what I mean by that is really something that I find with Bach is to just learn the passages, especially with fugues and counterpoint, voice by voice, and really love each voice on its own, and then we sort of build it from the bottom up, and that's been a really constructive way of practice that I've found. Reading chamber music with friends is not only just a lot of fun, I think across the board, but again is a way of working with the energies of other musicians and taking inspiration from that. Listening to live music, again, I hope it returns soon, but that is huge for our inspiration as pianists. Sound-based passage work I talked a little bit about, and if you have any questions about it, please reach out. I think there are those passages where there are very specific sound effects we're trying to create, but they might be particularly technical, and so a big part of our development as pianists is developing that more subtle facility, and so I hope that makes some sense. Those are really valuable passages to do deep dives on. And another part of my training was pretty solid backing in music theory and theoretical analysis. Found this especially helpful with the classical period works of Mozart, Beethoven, and Haydn. Understanding the sort of framework of sonata form, of all the basic forms, and what composers are doing in that framework, and how they kind of break the shackles of that framework and do interesting things with it. Finally, the more practical side. I mentioned technical exercises, and Dochnani has a book of technical exercises which are fantastic for the independence of fingers. Those were a real leap for me, and they may be challenging at first, but they're fantastic. Brahms wrote a really great book of 51 exercises, a lot of sort of arpeggiated work that ends up being really useful for playing his works. So if you're sort of geared in that particular vein, that can be helpful. I find some of Hanon helpful, and not to go crazy and play the entire book in my experience, but playing Hanon, transposing it through the keys is really a nice way of familiarizing our hands with the contours of the piano. And finally, can't harp on it enough, scales and arpeggios were just a really huge part of my training, and just that fluidity that comes from our hand fitting into the scale is so important. Passage work, I mentioned Alfred Cortot. If any of you are familiar with his editions of some of Liszt and Chopin, he will go on for pages and pages about how he would practice these works. And so not only are those really helpful additions to have, he presents some really interesting ideas for a more systematic repetition, which I think is important. And that leads me to the last one, which is always having a purpose when we are going into that really repetitive practice. It's easy to kind of, as I said, play our ears off and stop listening, but it's important to always have a goal in mind for repetition. So let's put it all together. The creative spectrum is a framework of ways we can engage with the piano, from the more creative and abstract to the more physical and practical. The idea is that we're harnessing these different types of energy and ambition we have to practice on a particular day, and in balancing them, we avoid burnout. There's a feeling that each day is a new sort of adventure to have with these different types of practice. It also has the effect of keeping our ears fresh, just always listening, because we've got sort of a variety of ways of engaging with the piano, and we're always asking ourselves, are we listening? The more practical effect in my experience is that it's strengthened my technique while maintaining an enthusiasm for what I'm working on. And ultimately, in context of piano competitions, my hope is that this is going to provide you with a way of, really feeling solid about competition preparation in the more technical and rigorous aspects, but also just having a good time and enjoying the music, loving the music, and perhaps most importantly, developing in the longer run, beyond the scope of one particular competition or another. So now I want to talk about a couple of just more practical tips and tricks that I picked up in my time with piano competitions. So it all starts with, where do we look? Where do we find these piano competitions? And I think that goes to a simpler question, which is, what are we looking for? And that might relate to the experience we've had up to this point in terms of either performing experience or competition experience. And then, of course, our goals and aspirations. What do we hope to achieve with this? Is it more about our personal development, or is there something we're really striving to do in terms of kind of getting ourselves out there on a bigger scene? So with clearer answers to those questions, there are options for what we're looking for. There are those local competitions, which are great because we're engaging with the community around us. Most of those, in my experience, have just been kind of hearing through the piano teacher, through word of mouth. For kind of branching out a little bit, there are regional competitions, and I encourage just a simple Google search on those. One thing that was great about Connecticut was that a lot of the orchestras around would have these concerto competitions, and that was a big part of my early development. So encourage you to just use the internet, look around, ask around, and in terms of national level, there is the MTNA, Music Teachers National Association, has its own competition and also is a network of teachers, and I'm sure some of your teachers are a part of it, and it's also a way of finding out about competitions and networking across the country. And then finally, internationally, a lot of the big competitions, of course, are just going to be by reputation that we hear about them. One resource that's really extensive is the A-Link Ardrich Foundation. That's just alinkardrich.org. Really just totally extensive listing of competitions, when they're taking place, what's needed, and it's very systematic and well done. So I encourage you to check that out if you're looking on the international level. So once we've decided that we're going to participate in a particular competition, the first big hurdle is recordings. And unfortunately, recordings for me are a reduction into 2 dimensions. And what I mean by that is that we lose the live kind of tangible experience of listening and experiencing someone play. And as a result of that, I have really come to realize a couple of things. The first one is that in terms of sound, in terms of ideas, and in terms of even execution, we really have to think big. We have to try to bring this playing into 3 dimensions as best we can. And so perfection is such a standard of competitions these days. It really is not the be-all, end-all, and I really encourage you to take risks in even in recordings. I think it's very important. Recording quality in terms of finding the right place, the right sound. It is important, and of course the right equipment, but I have at least found that it is not the bottom line. If we're able to communicate those ideas clearly, good recordings will go a long way, but if we have something to share, that is important. And my other advice is to stay away from repertoire. I call it canned repertoire, but just repertoire that we're not really enthusiastic about. And I think that was a pitfall of mine at times, was playing the same things again and again. And if we are exhausted by what we're playing, that's not presenting things. That's not going to come across freshly. So, and when it comes to live performances, whenever those may come back, a couple of tips. Personally, find that getting good exercise and good sleep is crucial, not only for my day-to-day happiness, but on the day of a performance, just feeling like I am comfortable in my body. Circulation is a big thing, and I think this relates to meditation, which you'll hear about more in other presentations. But if we can have kind of some way of getting our juices flowing, that is always somewhat of a challenge, but I encourage you to think about that and how you really feel physically prepared to jump on stage. And I've always found that having kind of a standardized warm-up routine, something I know that works. For me, these are largely scales, but something that really gets the blood flowing in the fingers can be really helpful to always have. So throughout the recording process, the application process, all of the in-between, I think it's really important to remember to live. And in my experience, it was really easy to fixate on the goal, and it's great to have a goal. But expanding our horizons, and I know that as part of the Piano Celebration Week, you'll be hearing about meditation, exercise, healthy foods. These are huge in terms of just, living a really full experience, and that's going to also, come back and inform a more fresh perspective on the piano. I'll highlight something that's come up a lot in my experience, which is the superlative importance of a day off. There are those days that you really just feel like you need to take a step back, and I encourage you to explore that. Of course, we've got things we have to prepare for, but if it feels like things aren't fresh, I really encourage you to take a day off and just get that space. And finally, I have told you I was really fortunate to make lifelong friends, to travel through a lot of Europe, a lot of the States, and meet wonderful people. And, to whatever extent you are participating in these competitions, there's usually just a really wonderful group of people involved in organizing these things. So encourage you to enjoy those friendships and just enjoy those opportunities.
My hope today is that I've given you some food for thought. And if any of it is unclear, again, I'm going to put my contact info here, and I hope you'll reach out and we can talk about it. I also hope that if things come up along the way with the whole process from start to finish, that you'll feel free to get in touch with me. Always hope I can be helpful. And again, I just want to emphasize that I really wish you all the best with the process, and encourage you to think about everything as much as it's possible with sort of the big picture in mind, in terms of and just always remembering what you love about the piano and what you love about music. So thanks so much for listening.